Ever find yourself people watching on a pier, like really imagining the stories those faces hold?
Oh, totally.
We're doing that today, kinda, but with a potential screenplay called El Muelle. It's The Pier in Spanish.
Okay.
And trust me, these characters are just bursting with stories. We've got pages of notes and drafts all in the original Spanish.
Wow.
Which is amazing to see, like, the writer's mind at work, right? It's like we're eavesdropping on their imagination as they're piecing this world together.
I love that.
Yeah.
So cool. It's true. I mean, seeing a story in its raw form like that before it's all polished.
Right.
It just feels like there are so many possibilities.
Exactly.
And that title, El Muelle, already, I don't know, it sparked so many questions for me, just piers in general.
Ooh, good point.
They're such evocative places.
Yeah.
You know, they're thresholds between land and sea. They're associated with journeys, goodbyes.
A little bit of danger.
Even a hint of danger, yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of narratives are going to unfold against a backdrop like that?
Well, let's start with Hugo. He seems to be at the heart of it all.
Okay.
The writer describes him physically as this hunched figure almost trying to disappear into himself.
Interesting.
Which immediately made me think about his backstory. Years of relentless bullying, which left their mark not just emotionally,
Right.
but physically too. And he's an engineer,
Okay.
which we've seen before in stories.
Sure.
But the way the writer describes his technical skills, it just feels different. Like there's this potential for them to be used in really surprising ways.
I like that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And that just when you think you have a handle on Hugo, the writer hits us with this gut-wrenching detail. The disappearance of his wife and daughter years ago.
Oh, wow.
Gone without a trace. It's like the writer's just thrusting Hugo into this pit of loss, and we're watching him try to claw his way out.
Right.
But instead of just telling us he's devastated, we see it. You know, his job loss, dwindling, savings, his descent into this almost invisible existence.
It's interesting, too, because that descent leads him to a really unexpected job. He ends up the tech guy for an adult film network.
Wow, talk about a curveball, right?
Total curveball. It's such a bizarre contrast to this image of a heartbroken, isolated man.
It really makes you wonder if this is just a case of the writer going for shock value.
Yeah.
Or if there's a deeper meaning here. You know, is Hugo seeking solace in the anonymity of the digital world? Or could this be like the writer's commentary on our increasingly desensitized society?
That's a good point.
It's a really intriguing layer.
And here's where it gets even more interesting for me. The writer included a list of Hugo's quirks, and some of them are surprisingly specific.
Okay, like what?
Like he loves those old noir novels, but is terrified of real-life confrontations.
Oh, wow.
And get that he has this recurring dream where he's fighting back against bullies, but only in his sleep.
Interesting.
It's like the writer is scattering these clues about his inner life, his desires, his fears.
Yes, those little details that just add so much depth to a character.
Yes.
So we see that classic archetype of the relatable loser. You know, he's been dealt a difficult hand in life.
He has.
But then the writer mentions that he's an Enneagram Type 9, often called the peacemaker. Now, without getting too bogged down in Enneagram specifics, this type is known for avoiding conflict, seeking harmony above all else. So we have to ask, is Hugo's withdrawal from the world purely a result of his grief?
Right.
Or is it amplified by this deeper ingrained tendency to disappear?
It makes you wonder.
What do you think, listener?
Speaking of hidden depths, let's move on to Jenny, who couldn't be more different from Hugo if she tried.
Okay, how so?
If Hugo is a fading watercolor, Jenny is a neon sign.
Okay.
Impossible to ignore.
Got it. I see the contrast.
The writer does not hold back in describing her less than desirable traits. Selfishness, talent for manipulation, this almost compulsive need to wear different masks for different people.
It's interesting, though, because it's almost like the writer is purposely making her unlikable at first.
Presenting us with a caricature of someone we've all encountered.
Oh, totally.
You know, the life of the party who leaves a trail of chaos in their wake.
Yeah.
But then we get these glimpses of vulnerability that just add this whole other layer of complexity.
Exactly. Like the writer mentions her drug use, but it's not gratuitous or sensationalized.
Right.
It's connected to her emotional state, her desperate attempts to outrun something. We also learn about her fractured relationship with her divorced parents.
Okay.
Both trying to control her in their own way.
Oh, that's tough.
And yet there's a mention of her father always being there for her, even when she pushes him away.
Interesting.
Right? Like the writer wants us to see the human being beneath this carefully constructed persona.
It makes you root for her a little bit, even with all the other stuff.
Even though she's not the most likable? Exactly.
The question is, will she be able to break free from this cycle of self-destruction she seems trapped in? And this is where things take a turn.
The writer does not shy away from difficult topics, that's for sure. Jenny's story takes a dark turn.
Oh, no.
Yeah, ending in a brutal, graphic death.
Wow.
It's a shocking moment for sure. And it really made me think about the writer's intentions here.
Yeah.
Are they simply going for shock value, or is there like a deeper message here?
Right.
What are they trying to say?
It's definitely not a scene you easily forget. It felt like the writer was holding up a mirror to Jenny's chaotic life, you know?
Yeah.
Forcing us to confront the potential consequences of her choices. But it's also interesting to consider this in the context of her being an Enneagram Type 7, the enthusiast.
Ah, yes. The type known for seeking constant stimulation, chasing new experiences to avoid facing, any kind of inner discomfort.
Right.
Suddenly, her recklessness, her need to be the center of attention.
It takes on a whole new meaning.
It does. It takes on a new meaning. Could this be the writer's way of exploring the shadow side of this personality type?
Oh, interesting.
What happens when that pursuit of pleasure becomes a runaway train?
And the pier itself starts to feel like more than just a setting.
Right.
It's almost like a crossroads for these characters.
Totally.
A place where their lives intersect in these unexpected and sometimes devastating ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've already talked about Hugo and Jenny, but then the writer introduces two more really intriguing individuals, David and Sarah.
Okay.
David is older, seemingly content with his quiet routine life. But there's this darkness lurking beneath the surface, a secret from his past, from his time in the war that he's kept buried for years.
And that's the thing about secrets, right? They have a way of bubbling up when we least expect it.
Always.
And in David's case, it's his chance encounter with Jenny on the pier that brings his past crashing into his present.
It's fascinating how the writer orchestrates this seemingly random encounter, highlighting the interconnectedness of their lives.
Yeah.
David and Jenny are from completely different worlds, yet their fates become intertwined in this tragic, almost inevitable way.
And then there's Sarah, a young, ambitious writer. Sound familiar?
Oh.
We don't get as much detail about her in these early drafts, but she's clearly driven to make her mark on the world.
I like her.
She's pouring her heart and soul into this gritty detective novel, creating this dark, complex world on the page.
I couldn't help but wonder if there's a bit of the writer themselves in Sarah.
Ooh.
That desire to craft these compelling stories, to explore the darker side of human nature, to make sense of the world through fiction.
Right. And it makes her presence on the pier even more intriguing.
Right.
Is she merely an observer, or will she somehow get swept up in the events unfolding around her?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah.
Especially considering what happens next.
What?
A sudden, devastating loss throws Sarah's world into a tailspin.
Wow. Okay.
This is where I think the writer's skill truly shines. They don't shy away from the rawness of grief, the way it can upend even the most carefully constructed life.
Right.
But there's this note in the margins about not wanting to exploit this loss, which I found incredibly insightful.
Oh, wow.
It's like the writer is grappling with the responsibility of depicting these sensitive topics.
Yeah.
With both authenticity and respect for the characters and the audience.
And maybe that's something for us to think about, too, as we consume stories.
Right.
How much detail is enough? When does it cross the line from exploration into exploitation?
Such a good point.
These are questions worth pondering, especially as we delve deeper into this world the writer is creating.
Because things are about to get really interesting. Remember that pier we talked about, that liminal space where the land meets the sea?
Yes.
Well, get ready to leave solid ground behind, because the writer takes us on a detour, a ferry ride, into a realm that blurs the lines between reality and something far more surreal.
I have to admit, when I first read this part, I thought I'd skipped a page. 1 minute, we're on the pier with its salty air and seagull cries. The next, we're on this ferry shrouded in mist with Hugo as our guide. But the other passengers, they're not your typical tourists, are they?
Not at all. The writer describes them as almost spectral figures from a half-remembered dream.
Interesting.
And the atmosphere is thick with these unspoken rules, a sense that something profound is about to unfold.
And then there's the ferryman.
Oh, boy.
This guy is straight out of central casting for characters you don't want to mess with.
Tell me more.
He's physically imposing, sure, but it's his voice that really gets under your skin.
Okay.
Commanding, otherworldly, laced with this ancient knowing.
And he's not afraid to ask the tough questions. He engages Hugo in this dialogue, probing at his regrets, his unrealized dreams, those nagging what-ifs that haunt us all. It's as if the ferryman is challenging Hugo and, by extension, us to confront the choices that have shaped our lives.
It's like the writer has taken us from this gritty, realistic setting and dropped us into like a Greek myth.
Totally.
We've got River Styx vibes, those classic questions about life and death, and then boom, Hugo comes face to face with the person who murdered him.
Oh, wow.
Talk about an afterlife plot twist.
Right. It's a scene that could so easily veer into melodrama.
Right.
But the writer handles it with such restraint. This isn't about revenge or even forgiveness.
Right.
It's about two souls both caught in this web of fate, acknowledging this strange connection that binds them even in death.
And the way the writer portrays the killer is fascinating, too. He's not a monster.
Right.
Not some gleeful sadist.
Oh.
There's a sense of regret of being adrift, almost as if he's also searching for meaning in this surreal ferry ride.
Exactly. It reinforces this idea that we're witnessing a kind of purgatory.
Okay.
A space where these characters are forced to confront not only their actions, but also the ripple effects, the unintended consequences that extend, far beyond our understanding.
And then there's this whole element of payment that the ferryman demands. Not money or possessions, but something far more symbolic, something deeply personal.
I like that.
What did you make of that looking at these source notes?
It struck me as a form of reckoning, but not necessarily in a punitive way.
Okay.
It's more about understanding the weight of one's life. The things left undone, the words left unsaid. The ferryman seems to be seeking a kind of emotional honesty.
Right.
A willingness to face those truths we often bury deep within ourselves.
And it's so powerful because it's not a one-size-fits-all payment.
Yeah.
It's tailored to each individual's journey, their regrets, their hopes.
Exactly.
Like with Jenny, I won't spoil it for you, listener, but her payment is so perfectly aligned with her character arc, it gave me chills.
It speaks to the writer's ability to weave together these larger-than-life concepts.
Yes.
Death, the afterlife, fate, with these incredibly specific, relatable human experiences.
Right.
It's what makes this story so compelling, even in these rough draft stages.
Absolutely. And speaking of compelling, there's one more twist the writer throws at us. Remember Sarah, our ambitious young writer?
Yes.
Well, it turns out she's not a passenger on this ferry.
Right.
She's somehow part of the crew.
Wow. Which makes sense in a way, doesn't it?
It does.
She's the writer, the observer, the one who exists both inside and outside the narrative.
Right.
It's almost as if she's found the way to navigate between these worlds, the realm of the living and this in-between space.
And she seems surprisingly at ease with it all.
Yeah.
There's this line where the writer describes her watching the ferryman with a look of, and I quote, bored fascination. It's such a small detail, but so telling.
It is. It's as if she's already come to terms with the mysteries of life and death.
Right.
Accepting the cyclical nature of existence in a way that these other characters haven't quite grasped yet.
And then we get to Hugo's payment, the moment of truth. And it's not some grand gesture of redemption.
Nope.
It's something so much simpler, so much more poignant. He offers a doll.
Wow.
The very same doll he tried to give his daughter before she disappeared. The one she rejected. And yet in this liminal space, it becomes this powerful symbol of his love, his grief, his acceptance of what he cannot change.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful offerings come from a place of just genuine emotion of letting go.
And it seems to be enough for the ferryman because something shifts for Hugo in that moment.
Yeah.
He straightens, lets out this sigh that sounds almost like relief, and there's this sense that he's ready to move forward, whatever that might mean for him.
It's a beautifully ambiguous ending,
It is.
leaving us with more questions than answers.
You're right.
Does Hugo find peace? Does he reunite with his family? Or is this just the beginning of a new chapter in his journey? The writer leaves that for us to ponder.
And that's the mark of a story that stays with you, right?
I'll agree.
It sparks your imagination, invites you to come up with your own interpretations, your own answers to those lingering questions.
Exactly. If you were Hugo standing before the ferryman, what would your payment be? What would you offer as a symbol of your life, your regrets, your hopes? It's a powerful question to consider, and it speaks to the enduring power of storytelling. We may not have all the answers, but in exploring these narratives, these glimpses into the human condition, we might just discover something profound about ourselves.
And on that note, we come to the end of our deep dive into El Muelle. We've explored flawed characters, grappled with tough questions, and maybe even unlocked a few creative ideas of our own along the way. If these themes resonated with you, listener, keep an eye out. Perhaps this writer will share more, or maybe this deep dive will inspire you to create something equally thought-provoking. Until next time, keep exploring those murky, magnificent depths of storytelling.